Rob, finally, welcome to the DevOps Diaries podcast, sir.
Thank you very much. It feels like it's taken a while to make my first appearance, but I'm glad to be here.
I'm very glad to have you on the podcast. Rob, you're now an author. Congratulations.
Thank you very much, sir. Yeah, that's been a fun project. Not without its challenges, but yeah, I think very much worthwhile. To see a book come out in your name and see it in people's hands. A lot of folks on social media have been posting it, so it's very satisfying.
Yes, I can imagine so. I can imagine so. A huge accomplishment and a huge achievement for you and your co-author, Lars Malmquist. Tell us a little bit about the book, Rob. So Salesforce DevOps for Architects. How did this book come about and why is it important?
Yeah, so I'd always kind of wanted to get to a point where, as well as doing a lot of the work that I do in the day job of, promoting DevOps and going to events and speaking to folks about that, I wanted to really sort of capture it so that people can have it as a more of a reference and kind of look back on that when they need to. But also, I think, there's a lot of talk around Salesforce DevOps for devs. As the name DevOps tends to suggest. I often do a session on sort of introducing those concepts to admins as well. But I think there was definitely a gap at the architectural level. So not necessarily looking at specific implementation, but more kind of looking at the bigger picture. It's like, what does DevOps bring to the table? How can it help my business? What are the areas that constitute DevOps so that I can make sure that I've got a very holistic view of implementing that for my company or clients I work with, if you're a consultant, and just generally looking at sort of bigger picture of how do we actually initiate a DevOps program.
Yeah, absolutely. I definitely tend to agree then. And in your mind, so we don't want to give away too many spoilers for the books. We want to get people out there and purchasing this fine material off Amazon. Of course, I will share a link where folks can do just that. But what is the kind of key difference when we think about DevOps? You're a developer yourself. That's your Salesforce background. What is the key differences and the key tenets of DevOps for an architect versus, say, an admin or a developer through your experience as you've grown to become an architect yourself?
Yeah, I think when you're in an architect role, you definitely take that high level viewpoint. You're looking at the broader landscape, and some folks, that may be the landscape of their Salesforce implementation. For some folks that are in roles such as an enterprise architect, they're looking even bigger picture across the IT landscape. So I think, from an architectural perspective, you want to make sure of a few things. So one is that you're getting everybody on board with that change. Okay. And a big part of that is highlighting the benefits. Okay. It's around, here's the benefits that allow us to be more productive, more efficient in our delivery. But equally, you're also highlighting the risks of not doing it. By not doing backup, for example, we're exposing ourselves to huge amounts of risk if something should go wrong.
Yeah.
If we deliver change that is not thoroughly tested, then we put ourselves open to potentially financial, but certainly reputational risk. So, and these are considerations that, at the architectural level should always be part of everything that we deliver. But as I said, one of the things I wanted to move slightly away from, although not completely in the book, is not get too much into the weeds of specific implementation or specific tooling for that matter, but more, here are some approaches and techniques and best practices that you can apply regardless of how you apply them. So whether you're using GearSet, obviously that's where we're based, but you could be using any of the other tools out there or open source tools. I do kind of touch upon things like Jenkins and GitHub Actions, which are free and open source tools. But it's more around, it's more around what you do, not how you do it in some respects. There are certain things that you'd want to make sure you cover, but the specifics of, which tool should I use to do this job matter less. And that's where the architect mindset comes in a lot more. By the time you get to implementation, it becomes much more of a developer or a team lead kind of problem.
Yeah, no, I would agree. And there's going to be folks listening to this podcast that do kind of sit in an admin or developer camp. So what I'd like to ask you is, what is kind of the key differences between we were talked about architects at that kind of higher level and more strategic overview, but if somebody's looking to make that career step or change or fancy something, doing something slightly different, what is the key specifics of an architect's role in a Salesforce implementation that folks can be thinking about or working towards or striving towards and say, hey, I might want to do that?
Yeah, this is a fun kind of line of thought that I've had with a lot of architects. I've been to sort of architect community events as well, and I always kind of maintain that once you're reasonably established on the Salesforce platform, particularly if you're a solo admin or a solo developer, you inherently are an architect because you're making those design decisions already. You're thinking about, okay, if I do this, what is the impact that it's going to have on other things? How can I deliver this? How can I transform those requirements into an actual deliverable? What are the touch points for integrations? Sometimes there are many architects in the Salesforce world just without the job title of architects. But I think if you want to formalize moving to an architect, then the biggest skill that you have or will need is that what is the impact? Looking at the broader landscape beyond just what am I doing? How does this fit in to the greater sum of parts that constitute my Salesforce org and potentially other systems as well? So it's taking that kind of wider ranging view and preempting issues and framing that and engaging with stakeholders is another part. And those two come together because ultimately, as an architect, you want to be reassuring those stakeholders that actually you have applied this level of thought, that you have preempted those issues, that you've kind of weighed up the risks, and you can present that as a cohesive summary of, if we do this project, here are the risks, here are the advantages, here is how we'll mitigate those risks. And it's just that kind of higher level thinking, I think, that the architects do. And some architects, will be the hands-on implementers of these things, and some won't. It's a wide-ranging role. So, if you're not a code wrangler, then you can still be an architect. A lot of very good business analysts go on to become architects because they have that analytical thinking and that bigger picture view that the role entails. It's just kind of stepping it up a little more in the technical space.
Yeah, that reminds me quite a lot of a conversation that I've had previously on the podcast with Jody Herbeck, who wrote Rock Your Role as Salesforce Admin, another great author, another great book in our space as well, and would highly recommend that as another piece of literature for all folks to read, regardless of your role. And what we find often is, if you're asking the right questions and if you are assessing all of those things and rocking your role as a Salesforce admin, you're kind of doing all those things that's required of you or would be expected of you in that kind of architecture status as well. So it's interesting, the interplay that all of our roles have or has developed into. It's not just clicking buttons on a screen and creating a flow or creating those templates or whatever it might be. It's actually thinking, where's the business value, what is our business trying to achieve with this, especially I would say, especially if you're a solo admin as well, or in an org responsible for that.
Yeah, a lot of those folks are architects, they just don't know it yet.
Yeah. Tell us a bit about the experience of writing a book. So I guess to do that and to give everybody a bit of an appreciation for where you've come from, run us through your background and your Salesforce experience and
Sure.
this new challenge that you took on when writing this book.
Okay, yeah, no, I always like sharing my origin story, as it was.
It makes you sound like a villain, superhero villain.
Well, hero or villain, yeah. We'll let the listeners decide. But no, so way back in the mist of time, aka 2010, I was a freelance developer / support guy. Just kind of the last line of support. So the point where we're not going to be able to fix this issue or solve it without changing the code kind of support. And I was mostly doing Microsoft .NET development, but a few other bits and pieces. So I got a contract and they said, okay, so if anyone asks, you're the Salesforce expert, because the only way we could get budget signed off on adding another contractor is if we hired a Salesforce expert. And I said, yeah, no, that's fine. So what is this Salesforce thing? I had no experience of it at all. And obviously, fast forward many years, I spent 13 years on the platform. I really took to it. As a developer, that solo developer that we talked about earlier, and just really kind of bootstrapping my way through it. This was pre-Trailhead back in those days, and a lot of the learning of that was learning by doing, and I'd hate to see any of the Apex that I wrote back in 2010 compared to what I now know. But if it works, don't kick it is a useful mantra. So yeah, 13 years of working with end users, with Salesforce partners as an SI, as a freelance consultant myself, set up my own little firm and had a few clients. So I've kind of seen, like many facets of how a Salesforce developer can be employed. There's different paths on that journey. A lot of time, I was the sole Salesforce resource. So inherently, admin, developer, and architect, and probably a little bit of BA rolled into one there. And that's kind of really what's kind of shaped my worldview on what an architect is. An architect is how you think and how you deliver, regardless of your job title.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think it's becoming more and more important to have that whole strategic overview with so many Salesforce clouds available now, and
Oh yes,
how do we architect a platform that is going to support business growth, not now but also in the future, and scalability and all those facets really come into play a lot sooner now than they might have previously. You look at some of the orgs that we've worked with and the customers that we've worked with and the huge monoliths that they have, and they're now in a re-architecting stage. So that upfront work and that upfront interest in overall system design and architecture is hugely valuable for new Salesforce customers, and even existing Salesforce customers that are either refactoring or creating a new org for their growth. With that being said, DevOps is obviously plays an important part of any implementation, and obviously that's what the book is about. Tell us about some of your experience with DevOps processes when you were in the weeds, if you like, and how you came to be interested in DevOps as a topic and now advocating for DevOps at Gearset.
For sure. Yeah. So, obviously, with a involvement in the Salesforce platform that stretches that far back, a lot of these tools just weren't available back then, so we were stuck with chain sets. And I know there's some folks in the community that go so far back it predates change sets. How they got things done, I don't know. I think it was everything straight into production. Hopefully we're past those days now. But yeah, so I started with change sets, and then when I was working for a Salesforce partner, one of the projects that we had there, we started using Ant packages. So the old force.com Ant package. I can't even remember the name of it now. It was a while back, but it was basically Ant packages with some sort of Salesforce specific extensions. So I kind of got into that model of, thinking more about metadata. Building up my package XML file and building the scripts for the different tasks that the Ant would need to do. And so I started working in that way, and it wasn't, even back then, we weren't really heavily using source control. And then later down the line, I was working at an end user client for a bank permanent role. And again, I introduced Ant to them. Now, that organization was a very big Microsoft shop, so they had quite an investment in deployment tools and DevOps tools on that platform. They were using Team Foundation Server. They were using Subversion rather than Git, which is it's a choice. It's the very few, if any, DevOps stacks that I've seen on Salesforce that work with that. I think everything is usually predicated on Git, but we kind of made it work with a lot of manual scripting. So again, that's kind of the next stage of evolution of working through, towards easy Salesforce DevOps. And then I went to an event in Cambridge, home of Gearset, although I wasn't part of Gearset back in those days. And I did see, one of the Salesforce demo jams that you see at a lot of events where people will present their Salesforce application in just 3 minutes. And Gearset was one of those. And I thought, wow, I need to get my boss to get me this. This will save me so much time. I never did manage to get my boss to buy it for me. But later in life, when I was consulting, I did get a Gearset license and started using it in earnest. Now, obviously, we both work at Gearset. I do have a bit of a stake in this one, but I think anything would have been better than trying to fight with Ant packages. And so now we see more and more folks, adopting DevOps tools. Some will use traditional approaches from other platforms, things like GitHub Actions or Jenkins or Circle CI. Some of those tools that are aimed at multiple platforms and can be kind of crafted with a bit of work to work across the board. Others will pick up Salesforce specific tools. So it's nice to kind of move into that space, having kind of gone through the journey and kind of earned my stripes of going through the pain of other ways of doing things and landing on a solution that just makes life a lot easier.
Yeah. Speaking of making life easier, what's the translation then? So in your mind, what is the key benefits to adopting a great process, DevOps process specifically, and having that process? And what can you do additionally because you have such a smooth process set up to help you deliver on the platform?
Yeah, I mean, the very easy win was not having to stay up till 2 a.m. trying to sort of craft a package XML, do a delivery, it didn't work, try again, and be up all night just trying to get a release out the door. That's a big win. But, if we look at sensible working hours, which I now am able to have, then, the nice thing about it is that, as part of your working day as a developer or an admin, just deliver, somebody that delivers change on the platform. The nice thing is that you don't have to worry about, is my deployment going to work? Is it not going to work? How long is it going to take? What dependencies have I forgotten, etc., etc. Big releases will have a little bit of that, but we try to encourage not having big releases. Small, early and often incremental changes is the way forward there. But the thing that all comes together to enable is less time deploying changes, more time to make changes, right? It's delivering that beneficial change to your customers, your end users. You've got more time to work on creating that change and working with the business to say, okay, I understand you're looking to do a project to do this. We can perhaps leverage this capability of Salesforce. We can craft that. You can have that far better level of engagement because you've got time to do that. But also that in turn means that you get it right first time, which frees up more time. So you get into this virtuous cycle of, change, collaborate, deliver, collaborate. It just keeps going around. Just a continuous improvement cycle, which very neatly aligns to things like sort of agile and whatnot, where you're looking for this continuous improvement and enhancement, and so DevOps and agile actually are very good bedfellows in that respect.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that ability just to, like you say, collaborate and make change with the business in a more streamlined fashion. If you're not having time sucked away every week or every 2 weeks by doing these deployments and stressing about it, you're gonna have something that I talk about quite a lot is the culture and the impact on people with technology, and that ability to reduce burnout, things like burnout, frustration, all these things can really affect the morale of a team. And I think that's really important and certainly worth investing the time and effort into changing so that you can have happier people on your team and happier folks delivering what they want to deliver and upskilling in other areas because they have this process that supports that. Something you mentioned right at the start of this conversation was part of an architect's job when it comes to either DevOps or in general on the platform, whatever platform they're working in, is generating buy-in. What is your tips for folks to generate buy-in from either executives or a wider team that changing process is the right thing to do?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think, even in your question there, you've kind of hit a very important nail on the head there, is that, getting buy-in comes from two directions, top down and bottom up. So from the bottom up, it's the grassroots admins and developers, the people that are fighting with these deployments day in, day out. They want an easier life. They want to not have to have that fight. And so you get a degree of buy-in there in terms of, we just want things to get better. Equally, you do have to sometimes kind of tackle but it works, and it's the way we've always done it, and we know it works, so why change? So there's a little bit of, delivery of, how's the best way to phrase this one? I think, just kind of highlighting what the benefits, what do you stand to gain from doing this? And obviously the time savings are important to the people at the bottom level. The cost savings and the productivity gains are important to the people at the top level. And I think, you always have to craft your message for the audience. Okay. So, the higher up the management chain you go, potentially the less time that people have available for bigger discussions. So you have to be clear, concise, and straight to the point on that type of messaging. Whereas with
Such good advice.
with development teams, you have a little more capacity to, maybe like do a workshop one afternoon or something like that. So always kind of make sure that you know the value of people's time, but also because it's DevOps and because it's an efficient, streamlined way of working, the value of time becomes the message as well, right? Because you're saving time, you're saving efficiency, you're doing less rework, which means that you can focus on new items and new enhancements. You can deliver that change. So yeah, I think it's, at both levels, it's around, making sure that you enumerate the benefits. At the top level, sometimes it's about enumerating the risks of not doing it. So you get a balanced viewpoint on that. And it's just making sure that you've covered your basis. The many times in my early career where I've tried to present a scenario to a VP or a CIO or something, and they'll say, "Oh yes, but what about this?" And it's like, I hadn't thought of that. So, do learn to sort of preempt things a lot. VPs and CIOs got there because they think of these bigger problems, and that is very much, aligns to what architects should be thinking.
Yeah, no, I think that's all great advice, and that's so important when you think about the value or how much time people actually have to be receptive to these ideas. Is there anything from your experience that like a VP or CIO cares more about? I think generally speaking, those are the types of people that folks listening to this podcast may have had less time interfacing with or speaking with,
Sure.
And may not know these things. So what types of things do they tend to care about, or are they more considering in their day-to-day?
Yeah, I mean, I think, in a lot of larger organizations, obviously Salesforce will fall under the general umbrella of IT. And if we look at IT as a business function in large organizations, traditionally it's viewed as a cost center, not a revenue generator. Okay. So one of the sort of more traditional viewpoints of sort of IT leadership is, how can we be more cost efficient? How can we spend less money so that the business has more money to do the things that they want to do? Or, how can we not have such a large impact on profits? Or, it's these type of things. But I think there is definitely a movement now towards, how can we repurpose and extend and find new innovative uses for what we have already, or perhaps, with some slight change and pivoting, how can we turn this into a revenue stream? So I think the old mindset of, IT is just a sunk cost is slowly changing. And I think when you look at SaaS platforms in generally, particularly Salesforce, when you look at agile and DevOps in terms of being able to turn on a dime, as our American friends say, and then be able to kind of adapt and quickly respond to changing markets, changing customer needs, then that's where you have those opportunities to actually move towards a more of a growth mindset. So I think, at the exec level, there's always going to be this element of how do we reduce risk, whether that's security risk, whether that's financial exposure, whether that is, sort of the general stewardship of projects and initiatives. That's never going to go away, right? Risk management is a big part of running a business, let alone IT. But I think also, there's now this mindset of how can we gain that technological advantage over our competitors, or how can we get a technological advantage that best delivers to what our customers actually want. And those are the types of concerns that I think the top level CIOs, VPs, SVPs, etc. will want to be considering.
Yeah, I would wholeheartedly agree. And I think that point that you raise about IT not being a cost center anymore and a revenue generator is such a interesting concept and such an important concept as well. I think anybody that has been involved in the purchasing process of Salesforce, a lot of Salesforce's marketing is about getting to customers quicker, and Salesforce being something that does enable revenue generation and does enable better experiences, and that in turn, I think if we understand that at the bottom up, from a bottom up approach as well, then we're all going to be more successful. And this isn't just a thing that we have to maintain to secure our customers' information and make sure that we can operate as a business, but actually is going to drive growth of our business from that perspective is really important. And I think that's where the sales folks at Salesforce, when they're speaking to our company executives, that's a lot of their messaging. And if we understand that and are able to take that forward in the way that we communicate changes to the platform or processes, that's going to be really important. Absolutely. You mentioned agile a couple of times, and that going hand in hand with DevOps. What does agile development mean?
So I mean, at a very sort of literal sense of the word agile, it means being able to move quickly and fluidly, and that very much aligns to kind of the approach of agile development, right? We want to not be bogged down with lengthy 6-month projects where we have requirements going at one end and 6 months later we have something pop out the other end and there's been no engagement in between, and then we end up with something that doesn't meet the goals, or in 6 months customer and business needs have changed and actually you're too late. So agile is much more around being responsive. It's around being able to deliver incrementally, get that feedback. The most important aspect of agile is always feedback, whether that's within your development team, whether that's within the stakeholders, ideally a blend of both, because software development is a team sport, and it's not just the IT team. But I think also it's around just making everything far more manageable. Okay, so nobody wants to be in the project of doom, or that's going to take forever, and we're still waiting on these requirements. It's around being able to move quickly. Now there's a mantra in a lot of organizations: move quickly and break things. I think slowly but surely people are moving away from breaking things, which can only be good. But I understand the ethos that it meant. The original ethos around that phrase is don't be afraid to try something new. If it works, fantastic. If it doesn't work, we can do something else. And that's what Agile's promise is. It's the ability to adapt and change and rethink very quickly and be much more responsive than traditional methods. So when you apply that to DevOps is a technical enabler of a lot of that. It's the delivery part of the cycle, but it's also the development process. So if you look at one of the kind of ideas of both Agile and DevOps, of breaking things up into much smaller manageable chunks so that you're constantly delivering, that process starts with business analysis. It's requirements gathering. It's okay, I have this requirement, but as a business analyst, how can I break that up into smaller chunks so that I know that my delivery team or my development team that I'm working with can actually incrementally deliver it. So you're already in that DevOps and Agile mindset of how can I make this a manageable unit of work so that, this enormous requirement that the business has, because the business is thinking, I just need these outcomes. How can I turn that into, okay, well, first we'll do this, then we'll do that, and we'll just layer it up until it becomes the solution that we always wanted. Because the advantage of doing that, again, both from a DevOps and agile thing, which is why I love the parallel, is that you get to know and engaged with the client. You get to know of problems earlier. Okay, if something's not quite, oh, can you tweak that? Yeah, that's not quite what we meant. You don't find that out 6 months down the line. You find it out within a day or two, or even less, of creating that, so that you can respond quickly before it moves up too far in the life cycle.
Yeah. What's your advice then? Because that's really important and something that I think gets lost a little bit, whether it's in consultant-led projects or internally led projects, is that communication piece. How do you prevent getting to UAT and something not meeting requirements?
Regular checkpoints, talk to people. Okay, you want to make sure that you're constantly getting that feedback loop, which is why the small chunks and the incremental stuff becomes important. Now, there are some challenges with that. I'll be honest. One is, again, be mindful and respectful of people's time. The business is busy running the business. Okay, they don't always have time to review every design decision, every field that you add. You need to make sure that that's at a sensible level, both in terms of what you're presenting and how often you're presenting it. And also be mindful of the sizing of your feedback group. Okay, it's very easy to fall into the trap of what I call design by committee, where everyone has an opinion, and then these things kind of escalate, and then somebody will have the executive button to say, right, well, I'm making an executive decision, we're doing it this way. So you can get bogged down in meetings. So you should always try and make it collaborative, absolutely. But ultimately, you still have to deliver. So it's a balancing act, and this is where we learn, we adapt. We work on projects. Big part of agile is what worked well, what didn't work well. Let's learn from that and fold that back into the next cycle. So keep on doing that. But yeah, the communication is key. But do keep on top of it and don't let it get run away with you, as it were.
Yeah, I think throughout this conversation, the thing that comes back to is, as we started to talk about this agile way of working and communication and being able to deliver iterative change, like you've already said, like DevOps processes and great DevOps processes will allow you to support that iterative change and that agility for change that's required because things do shift. You might have, I think one of the things when I've spoken to architects and engineers of products and services, even outside of Salesforce, what they say is like, you might start with one idea and then you start solutioning and you're like, this is a much bigger problem than we anticipated, or much more tricky, and we need to do X, Y, and Z. And having that ability to deliver smaller incremental change and work towards the ideal robust solution that you're working for. If you don't have a system that allows you to do that, then you can be in trouble real fast, and you don't get anything done, and you can't do delivery over deliberation. You get sucked into all of those kind of conversations and that design by committee
No, absolutely.
phrase that
And
you mentioned.
this is one of the great things that across the whole of GearSet we do, particularly in our engineering and support functions, is we distill things down to what is the job to be done. Don't solution now. Don't tell me how you want to solve the problem. Explain to me the problem itself, and then we'll all work together to solve the problem. And I think it's very easy to kind of lose track of that until you get sort of practiced in it. But if there's one piece of advice I would give to folks that are looking to move into that architect space or analyst space, any of the spaces, but particularly the architect, is distill things down to what is the job to be done? What are we trying to solve here? And then we can go away and think about design and feedback that design and collaborate and work together. But the first step of solving a problem is understanding the problem.
Exactly. That's such a great thing to, and I would definitely recommend if you're listening to this and wondering more about the job to be done, go away and have a look at the job to be done frameworks and what that methodology is, because I think that's a fantastic place for anybody to start, especially if you are in a smaller team and looking after Salesforce, that job to be done framework is really helpful for understanding what you need to build and how you need to build it. Something that both you and I have been talking about quite a bit here already. Coming back to the book, Rob. So the book itself is a fantastic guide for those architects. But from a personal experience in terms of writing something this important, what's kind of been your own personal lessons that you've gained from doing something new? I know long form content hasn't typically been part of your job description until recently in your career, but a book is a big undertaking. What's some of the personal lessons that you kind of gained, and how have you seen yourself grow through taking on a project like this?
Yeah, I think the biggest takeaway is, if you are looking to write your first book, don't underestimate how much time and effort that takes. I thought, I write blog posts all the time. This should be easy. It's just, there's 17 chapters. That's 17 blog posts. Well, for a start, a chapter is a lot longer than a blog post. But also, when you're writing it as a book, and it's particularly a reference book, you need to be much less opinion based and much more fact based. There's room for some opinion, but I think it always needs to be balanced. So I think one kind of important thing when we talk about balance to point out here for this book is this book is separate from my day job here at Gearset. Okay, so I will cover Gearset as a chapter, but I also cover Capado, FlowSum, AutoRabbit, some of the other big players in our space. I cover open source solutions. So it's certainly not prescriptive in how we do things. And it is a separate creation to the day job. Now, obviously, the experiences that I've gained from my day job have significantly enhanced my knowledge of the topic, which means that I can kind of a little more authoritatively write a DevOps book. But I think, one of the key things of it is, find a subject matter that you care about, find a subject matter that you know about to a degree. And that's not to say that, you know everything. So I have done quite a bit of research, and I've learned a lot of things that I didn't know before starting on this book around the topic. And, there is potential for a second edition. And already I'm thinking of things that I'd want to expand the book and cover in addition to kind of what we have in the book already. But yeah, I think the biggest challenge has been carving out the time. I have a day job, I have a family, I'm on various committees and charitable orgs and things. I do tend to overcommit myself a little bit. But yeah, I mean, there is the nascent beginnings of a second book on the way already. So
Yeah.
learn to say no, people. It's okay.
Yeah, no is a full sentence, which is, I think, one of our friends' favorite phrases in the ecosystem too. Something that you mentioned there that I think is really important for everybody to remember is everybody is still on a continual learning journey. You mentioned that writing this book is you had to do research for it and you had to learn new things, and now you're more experienced because of that. And that's very similar to another conversation that I've had with Francis Pinder, who has also been a guest on this podcast. He talks about DevOps process mapping, which is a great episode back in the early days. But a conversation that we've had previously is that there are no gurus and there are no true experts, because everybody is still on a learning journey. Even the best minds in their own respective fields are continuously learning. It's just you may have more experience than the next person. And I think that's an important mantra and something that everybody in, especially the Salesforce ecosystem, needs to understand now. You cannot know the full platform. You cannot know everything about Salesforce, and you can't even know everything about one specific product in Salesforce, I don't think, anymore. No. Or like you have demonstrated just now, we ourselves, whilst we advocate for DevOps, we still have things to learn and things to experience as the platform changes and as our ways of thinking around DevOps changes and evolves based on what's happening in the landscape. And I think that's an important thing for everybody to remember.
Yeah, no, absolutely. As you said, no one's kind of reached the end of that journey and like, okay, I've got there now, I know everything. But some folks are further ahead than others, and those are the folks that I learn from. Maybe there are folks that are at an earlier stage of their DevOps journey that hopefully are learning from us, like from your podcast and our blog posts and things that we do. And it's all about making sure that, as we learn things, we share that. Okay, we make sure that everybody can come up to, the journey that we've taken. There are people out there now that have reached a level of accomplishment in 3 years that it's taken me 13 years to reach. And some of that's because I'm getting old and forgetful, but I mean, in all seriousness, a lot of it is because there are some fantastic folks in the Salesforce community that when they discover something, they share it back so that people don't have to learn from the same painful lessons or the trial and error that others have had to do. So that you're kind of giving everyone a leg up in the community and allowing them to get further forward in a shorter space of time.
Yeah, absolutely. Speaking of which, you are a regular on the Salesforce events circuits as a speaker and what have you. Where can people potentially find you later this year if they want to talk about the book or DevOps or your Salesforce experience in general? And tell us where we can find that lovely hoodie that you're wearing.
Yeah, so let's start that in reverse order. So the hoodie is a tongue-in-cheek take on the classic Trailblazer hoodie. So I am part of a little group called Shirtforce, which you can find at shirtforce.org. We do tongue-in-cheek Salesforce and IT related t-shirts, hoodies, the occasional coffee mug, etc. Just to give folks a little bit of fun, of something to wear. But more importantly, 100% of our profits go to charity, and we change that charity every quarter, and we engage with the community to say, who would you like us to support? So it's quite democratized, and anyone can be a contributor of a design. So that's the story of the hoodie. And I think I live up to this one in particular.
I think you do. If anybody's listening on audio only, I don't know if you just said it then, Rob, but it says troublemaker instead of
It does say troublemaker. Yes, it's in the same font as the Salesforce Trailblazer hoodie. Yeah. But to pick up the other half of your question there around events, so both of us do try and engage with the community events as much as possible, and some of the official ones as well. Next up for me is Trailblazer DX in a couple of weeks in San Francisco. I've got a couple of talks there, and I'm also sort of helping out the GearSet team with some of the events that we've got going on there. I'm sure Jack will post some links to those around the podcast, so you know where to find us. But then on the community side, I'm just kind of looking up at my whiteboard here. Nothing 100% confirmed yet, but I have submitted talks to Architect Dreaming in Berlin, Forcelandia in Portland, Oregon, London's Calling, our favourite home ground event. They opened up their call for speakers in the last day or two, so I've submitted to that. What else have I got? Buckeye Dreaming, that's Columbus, Ohio. So yeah, quite a few US-based events. It's where the community seems to be, have the strongest foothold. But yeah, a little bit of European love in there as well.
Absolutely. Well, I am very much looking forward to getting my hands on my copy of Salesforce DevOps for Architects. If you're listening, you can do so. I'm going to post a link where you can find it on Amazon. I'll also do a link to shirtforce.org, an amazing organization that you and the folks at Shirtforce have created. I really highly recommend everyone goes and checks that out as well. Shirtforce.org as well as where you can find GearSet and Rob and myself in a couple of weeks' time. So if you are listening to this after March, hopefully you've seen us at TDX already, and you're inspired and you've been inspired to learn a little bit more about Rob Cowell and his teachings after that meeting. So if that is you, then thank you for coming back and listening to us more. Rob, is there any one last pearl of wisdom or any closing thought that you'd like to leave the listeners with?
Oh, there's an open opportunity. Quite put on the spot there. So I think if we keep it sort of, purely Salesforce, don't be afraid to carve out a niche. Okay, so I was a developer, I was an architect, I was doing all sorts of things for all sorts of people. And then I really got sort of, hooked on, like, how can we actually get these things out of the door and in the hands of the customers quicker? And that kind of exploded my journey into DevOps. And off the back of that, I moved from being in a development and architect role to an advocacy role, something that I'd wanted to do for a long time. It was quite a sea change. Advocacy, technically, it falls under marketing, but I'd like to think we do much more than just pure marketing. We don't sort of push too hard on, you must buy this. So yeah, I think, never be afraid to carve out your niche, and never be afraid to, once you've discovered a passion, just run with it. If it's something that you want to do, it's okay to change careers in your later years. Okay, I think I was in
You
my
didn't want to age yourself there.
no, I don't mind. I was in my late 40s when I stopped being a developer, and I was a Salesforce developer for 13 years. I was an everything else developer for about 25 years. And now I've made this move across and couldn't be happier. So it's okay to jump across if you find something that you really want to do and you really care about. And that applies to all types of Salesforce roles. If you're an admin that wants to be an architect, if you're a BA that wants to be a project manager, if you're a developer that wants to move to marketing like I did, all of these things are possible. You just have to kind of take that leap of faith.
Lovely. Thank you so much, Rob. Your time is invaluable as always. And listeners, I hope you have really enjoyed this episode of DevOps Diaries. Links to everything that Rob and I have discussed in this podcast are down below. So be sure to go and check those out. If you are listening to this prior to TDX in a few weeks' time, so we hope to see you there. And as always, you can catch me on another episode of DevOps Diaries with another amazing guest sometime soon. If you've reached this point and you've enjoyed the podcast, please do me the huge favor and the huge courtesy of liking and subscribing to this podcast wherever you listen. That really helps us out continuing to bring you the best episodes possible. Rob Cowell, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Jack. Take care.
Cheers.